सवेरे सवेरे यारों से मिलने मन ठन के निकले सवेरे सवेरे यारों से मिलने घर से दूर चले रोके से ना रुके हम मर्जी से चले बादल सा गरजे हम सावन सा बरसे हम सूरज सा चमके हम स्कूल चले हम
School chale hum. This can very well remind all of us the 90s era when Doordarshan advertised the importance of education and encouraging all children to go to school. There is a popular saying, if you are planning for a year, sow rice. If you are planning for a decade, plant trees. If you are planning for a lifetime, educate people. There are several such inspiring educational quotes where we can find the importance and value of being educated. But one thing from several things which I found best appropriate today and shall be more congruous in future is what Albert Einstein said. Education should not be making to learn the facts, but it should be the training of the mind to think. Through our teachings, schools, and the whole process of education, we should aim making creativity contagious so that creation happens automatically. Every individual is genius in its own way. No two individuals are same true. If we judge or are judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then either we can think the fish to be stupid or perceive ourselves as inefficient. Education should not be the barrier in the learning. The current Indian education system is well known for schools, exams, and marks. Regularly going to school and thoroughly completing the courses and getting good marks in exams are the yardsticks of education so far. But today, with the new National Education Policy NEP 2020, we can find scope for education to move towards less content and more towards learning about how to think critically and solve problems, how to be creative and multidisciplinary, and how to innovate, adapt, and absorb new material in novel and changing fields. Now it's time to give a rest to the rote learning and encourage education to be more experimental, holistic, integrated, discovery oriented, learner centered, discussion based, flexible, and of course enjoyable. The whole education system is also attacked by several stumbling blocks like gender discrimination, school dropout, poor quality of education, poverty, and many more. To address these issues, there are formulation of several policies and amendment of the existing ones with a hope of revamping our education in a better direction. NEP 2020 can be an epoch-making gesture. But simultaneously, we should not forget or ignore the fact that it can be difficult to solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So, on this World Literacy Day, to highlight the improvements in Indian literacy scenario and to reflect on other literacy challenges with a special focus on National Education Policy 2020, Abhibyakti Research and Development Foundation ARDF organizes this discussion. We have with us Dr. Pradeep Kumar Choudhury as our expert. He is engaged in research and teaching at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He has also contributed to several national as well as international policies through his research. We have with us Dr. Ramakrishna Biswal as our other expert to share with us the psychological perspectives of NEP 2020, as his expertise is psychology and he is currently associated with NIT Rourkela as a faculty. With this, I, Dr. Antarjeeta Nayak, warmly welcome Dr. Choudhury and Dr. Biswal and all our listeners to this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Nayak.
Thank you, Dr. Nayak, for organizing this timely event. I congratulate you for this.
Thank you, sir.
Really, it's very timely because you are linking this with the national education policy. So again, I congratulate for this. That too in a day that is to be celebrated across the world, World Literacy Day. So I congratulate you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, very frequently we have heard that education is the key to success.
Yes.
Working hard at school and going on for further education or college has long been encouraged by parents and teachers for generations, as most of the people believe education is the key to success. But we can see that most potent men in India are not so educated, like several film stars, cricketers, and even business tycoons. There are a lot of people who have achieved success without having what we call proper education, and there are even more educated people who are not as successful as they wanted or thought they would be. We usually think that someone who is successful at school or university should also be successful in their career. We usually think or perceive, which is even not clear, that one is said to be successful when he or she is having a bag of degrees, a lucrative job to showcase, bank balance, an enriched standard of living, and the like. We always equate education with finding a good job or being employed and learning several things and earning money. However, this may not be true always. For statistics, records, and reports, education can always be a key to success. But very often, if we start counting the successful heads, we can find education at the back seat. So, in this context, who and what plays an important role? What can be the minimum education to be a successful person? Including vocational education in the school curriculum is certainly a great initiative of NEP 2020. Sir, can this be effective and efficient in making more successful person around us? I would like to have Dr. Choudhury's view on this regard. Dr. Choudhury, please.
Thank you, Dr. Nayak, for raising this very, very important issue. Even in this 21st century, we have to find out who is educated, who is actually not educated.
Yes.
So, because education is so vast, the term itself, I think we all have read it, that it's a very, what we call, powerful terminology, so-called education, which is often equivalent to like getting job, often equivalent to the knowledge, skills, and so on. So in this context, it's really important to define what education means to the society and how it is changing, how the meaning of education is changing over the years. That is an important issue that needs to be highlighted.
Okay.
In this context, let me clarify the pathways through which education is linked to development has changed significantly over the years.
Yes.
How education is linked to development. So that is changing very frequently with the changes in the site. That's an important point you need to understand. If you look at the literature in pre-90, you will see understanding on the role of education on societal development was quite narrow. Particularly the literature on education and development that were largely focusing the importance of education on economic development, particularly in the context of human capital theory, if you see, starting from 1960.
Okay.
But what happened in post-1990? We experienced a significant change in the pathways through which education is linked to development.
Okay.
So it is in this context I want to highlight the contributions of Nobel laureate economist Amartya Sen, who wrote a classical book on this. I think most of us might have read, is Development as Freedom, published by Oxford University Press. In that work, he has clearly emphasized the role of education. He actually questioned the narrow role of education for the society that was being debated till 1990.
Okay.
So the idea he was trying to give that when we say education, there was a change in that context. I want to highlight this. Education is for development, to education is development. There is a difference in this. When we say education is for development, we try to examine education as a means of development. That means education helps to develop the society, being productive, being in the labor market, being knowledgeable, and so on and so forth. But when we say education is development, we are saying education is an end to development. That means education itself is development. So there is a very critical change which we need to understand in this.
Okay.
When we say education is development, that means if somebody is educated, if a woman is educated in a rural area, then that's what the development is all about. Whether that woman is engaged in the labor market or not is secondary. The importance here is, I want to emphasize here is, the education itself is development. That's what the point that even Sen has emphasized in his several of his writings, particularly in his book, Development as Freedom.
Okay.
Then I want to say, in this context, I want to add one more point, that is, we need not to emphasize much on instrumental role of education at this moment. We have to emphasize on constitutive role. There are two important roles of education. I think we need to understand very clearly. The instrumental role links education with labor market. How productive you are, whether you have got a job. I am not denying the importance of that, but I am saying in addition to that, education also plays several other important roles in the society that were being neglected in the literature. I think in the literature that were there on development in pre-1990. So what we are trying to see in this context, in post-1990s, particularly with the human development approach, we try to emphasize the externalities that education produces for the society, and that were being recognized very well. I want to give some examples. For instance, how education contributes to women empowerment, how education contributes in reducing crime, how education contributes for better health, how education contributes for better democracy. These are some of the externalities that are there in the with the education, but that were not being highlighted in the literature. That is one important step that was taken by the several developmental economists, and that showed us, that gave us a new understanding on the relationship between education and development. That's the point I want to highlight.
Okay.
So should I get into the idea of new education policy in this context a bit?
Yeah, it will be little bit hint.
Yeah. So what I would try to say that in the new, it's not, it's called the National Education Policy 2020, as you mentioned. So after 34 years, we have got National Education Policy that was, I think, got approved in July 2020 by the cabinet.
Yes.
So even I think in Press Information Bureau of the Government of India, it has also been mentioned that this is the first education policy of the 21st
century.
Yeah. So it is important to understand how the role of education in understanding the society is being looked at in this policy document. I want to link the debate that we are now carrying forward with the new education policy. So we need to understand what's the new in new education policy. That's an important thing that we need to understand.
Okay.
What I want to say, when we say that education helps in knowledge economy, education helps in economic development, education helps in societal development, so that those points are being well understood in the public policy domain or in the policy space. That is being said, that is being understood. What is not being said is how to link that or how to engage with a new kind of debate that will reach to the marginalized sections of the society. So the debate that we are conducting here, or the debate that we are taking forward here, is not being reached to several of the Indians who are there in the bottom line. So the initiative that we are taking through this, the world is celebrating the World Literacy Day and discussing on the new national education policy in this occasion, this will really help the people to understand how education plays a critical role for the society at large and also as an individual.
Yes.
So that I think once we will go ahead with some more points that will be clear further. But I want to highlight that this is not being done in several platforms. So this is one of the important platforms you are going to do where the idea will be discussed better, and that idea will be understood better among the citizens of the country.
Okay. So only we can comprehend that education is itself a process of development, and
Yes,
education should be creating about creation of jobs and not just seeking jobs.
Yeah, that's an important.
Yeah, that should be the focus of the new education policy while including the vocational education in it. So now we would like to move to Dr. Biswal to take his view on this question. Dr. Biswal?
Well, what I consider that success and literacy, uh, they go hand in hand as a skill. And so far as success is concerned, it is very subjective in nature. And education helps us to learn a skill for future livelihood, which Dr. Choudhury has already mentioned. But what we have not understood that he wanted to point it out, we need to work on that. And as a psychologist, I think the importance of education for individual development is more to be emphasized than anything else. So the individual in the education process is important. Hardly we think about that individual. We make several policies, so many things, so many organizations coming into play, but for whom it is meant, that person is not addressed adequately. Second, when we talk about education and at the early stages of education, we talk about literacy and numeracy skills at the foundation learning skills. So, in order to teach those foundation learning skills, maturation is one of the important parameters that we need to understand. The physical development, psychological development, social development, emotional development in the formative years of life plays a very vital role. It is not about that you have a space or a setup called a school where children are coming and there is some kind of interaction is happening. Children are reading something and doing something, and education is over. It is not that. Education is much, much, much broader than this. We have a very narrow vision of education in our practice. The way we understand education is very limited, very confined to some four walls, and it is not education. Then I would like to add learning to learn is the biggest challenge, and it is a skill to be acquired by children at an early age. So, learning to learn is not that easy. When a child leaves home, comes to a new environment, which is completely new, all new people are there, how the child is adapting to a new environment, understanding that is also important. Just by forcing the child to learn something by practicing again and again is not going to help us in the long run. And literacy and numeracy skills are not only essential for future jobs but also important for a better life. What Dr. Choudhury has also mentioned. Success at an early age, and at least what I think, is learning to learn the skills of literacy and numeracy, as the question was discussed.
Okay, so we could know that education should be beyond boundaries. Education beyond boundaries is success, and thinking out of box and creation can lead to a more successful path ahead. Okay, then we have heard a very nice quote like, if we learn to read today, we can lead tomorrow. So this means read to lead. Here I want to emphasize one thing. Is everyone who is studying, reading, and even going to schools are becoming the leaders of tomorrow. I too, being a social science researcher, have very often observed children going to schools fail to read and write and what to say about leading. During some of my research-related interaction with several children at government schools who are enrolled under Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, I found that even though the enrollment rates have increased, dropout rates have been reduced, but the quality of education they have earned is miserable. Student of class 8 fails to tell the multiplication table of 6 and 8, and even the English alphabet series are not correctly said by these class 8 students. In this context, it is a well praised move by NEP 2020, where education is regarded as a public service and not a commercial activity or a source of profit. Access to quality education is considered a fundamental right of every citizen. NEP 2020 has also emphasized on private philanthropic efforts for quality education to protect parents and communities from usurious commercial practices, including an arbitrary increase in tuition fees and many. But at this point, I am quite doubtful. In our country, the number of government schools and students going to government schools is much more than the private schools and its students. But if we see the statistics, we can find that the quality of education inculcated in the private schools is par as compared to the government schools. The private school students are having a better and a greater scope to lead, whereas the marginal groups, people from poor economic background, are not in a position to enroll their children in private schools which provide quality education. Moreover, parents from sound economic background are also not sending their children to the government schools, and to ensure a quality education and to excel in all exams, means competitive exams, they are sending their children for private tuitions also. So, at this context, can the private efforts to enhance the quality of education be philanthropic? Cannot be the government educational institutes be enhanced to provide quality education? How NEP 2020 could address this sort of problems in providing a quality education and ensuring education to be a public good and not a commercial source, to ensure every child their right to develop and grow in every spheres of life. At this context, how NEP 2020 could justify that sab padhenge, sab badhenge. That is, everyone will study and everyone will grow. Our listeners would certainly like to know more about this aspect of NEP 2020 from Dr. Choudhury. Dr. Choudhury,
Thanks.
please.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Nayak, for raising this pertinent question. Quality concerns in school education is a serious debate in the country.
Yes.
If you see World Development Report 2018, titled Learning to Realize Education's Promise, on learning, that emphasizes on learning crisis,
Yes.
it terms the loss of learning among the children is a global learning crisis. Students are getting into school, but they are not learning.
Yeah.
And this is being considered as a big loss for the society. I want to give some more data what you have already said, that India ranks, if you see the report, it has emphasized India ranks second after Malawi in a list of 12 countries where a grade 2 student could not read a single word of a short text. According to the annual status of education report, after data 2018, more than half of all children enrolled in grade 5 cannot read a grade 2 level text, or even cannot solve simple 2-digit subtraction problems. Similarly, if you see the NCRT, National Council of Educational Research and Training, National Achievement Survey 2017, it reveals that on an average, a class 8 student could barely answer 40% of the questions in math, science, and social studies. So what I am trying to emphasize is, students are getting into the school, but they are not learning. I want to how to understand this issue. This is an important point in front of us. How to understand this problem. Let me give 2-3 points to this. One, my first point to this is linked with the public and private division of school system. This is, I think, you said a bit on your introductory remarks that there is a clear division of public and private. The school education system in India is quite hierarchical. It's not only about the public-private also. There are also differences within public schools and also differences within private schools, which are relatively less explored in the literature. What is happening in the current context? An increasing presence of the private school in the country, particularly now in rural areas, even in semi-urban areas. If you go to villages, you will get private schools now. Because the data is saying close to 50% of the students are attending private schools now, and it is rapidly increasing. What is happening in this process is, there is a clear shift from public to private school, the student shift. Classrooms in government schools are getting empty day by day. And when I want to give an example. When I did a study very recently in Odisha on private schools, with a comparative perspective to government schools, I was just interviewing a government school teacher who is a headmaster in a government school. When I entered into the school, I just said, "Hello sir, how are you?" Then the reply from the government school teacher came as follows: "Please don't call me as a teacher." Then I was quite surprised. Why so? Because you are a teacher, you are teaching the students and all. He said, "No, I am not teaching your students in the school. Rather, don't call me as a teacher. Rather, you call me as a contractor. Rather, you call me as a distributor."
Yes.
Then I was quite apprehensive. Why? What is so? Then he took me out of his office and showed me a building that is coming out, a new building. He told, "I am the contractor for this building," because nowadays the teacher is also part of looking after the school. It's not entirely being given to outside, because that is the process that government is trying to put forth, by which it will be accountable. That's the government's understanding. I am a distributor because he showed me that I have to distribute so many cycles to the students. I have to distribute medicines to the students. So, for the last, let's say, few days, I have not visited the classroom. Rather, what I am doing, I am supervising the building, I am distributing the medicine, I am distributing the cycles, I am distributing the uniforms to the students, and after that, I am taking photographs and I am sending those photographs to the higher authorities. If I am not doing that, then I am being questioned. If I am not getting into the classroom, I am not being questioned. But if I am not sending the photographs on time, then I am being questioned by my higher authority. You tell me whether I should be treated as a teacher, I should be treated as a distributor, I should be treated as a contractor. I am giving an example, but you will find several of these examples in the schooling context. And that's what the school is now, a government school is all about. I am not saying it's not important to distribute cycles, it's not important to build infrastructure by schools and all, but engaging the teachers with all these activities actually is a problem that we all find.
Similar type of issues I have also faced during our research program.
Yeah. So what is happening actually, but what is the solution to this? Let us understand this. The government, what is trying to do is, government is trying to merge the schools where the enrollment is less. Government is trying to close several government schools or so-called public schools. I was just looking at the data. Even in the academic year 2019-20, Government of Odisha closed or merged several schools, government schools in the state, and the reason was due to less enrollment. But what I want to point out in this context is, it's important to understand why the schools, government schools that were full with students 3 years ago, are now getting empty. This is the question needs to be understood in the policy context or in the policy space. It's not that the school students are not getting into the school or not coming to the government school and they let us close those schools. How long you will close the school? And in this context, I want to bring NEP into the picture. National Education Policy. What the National Education Policy is trying to do is trying to say that we will create school clusters. I find this is a dangerous proposition by the policy document.
Yeah.
What it is trying to say that let us merge some schools or let us close some schools and generate a school cluster in the block level or in the panchayat level. I want to raise this concern. If the schools that are there in the village and students are not getting into those schools, rather they are getting into the next school that is located near to the government school, that is the private school, then how you will expect that the school cluster that will be created in the panchayat level or a block level, the students will travel and get into those schools. I would say that in next couple of years or in the, let's say 10 years down the line, those cluster schools will also be closed. If the real issue is not being understood. The real issue I find is to look at the issue very carefully and find out why students are not getting into the government school. Even if they are getting into the government school, why they are not learning. What is the issue there? Why there is a changing in the parental preference from government school to private school? Those are the issues that needs to be understood. I don't think NEP has engaged with these issues. Rather, NEP is trying to give some capsules, ready-made capsules to solve these problems, which I don't think is going to work. Rather, let's say 10 years down the line, we can see only the existence of private schools in the country, and there will be hardly any public school as such. The way that we are heading now, my understanding is this, because we are heading so fast in the expansion of private schools, and there is a clear shift from government to private school, government schools to private school, the children, then the issue is getting complex. I want to give my last point on this, that if you look at the government schools, who all are left with government schools? The government school children are, as I think you mentioned about that, the students from marginalized sections of the society. They are left with. And what is happening? This is a big danger to the school. Earlier, in our time, I am also a product of government school. So what we used to see, if the teacher is not coming to the school on time, the parents were reaching at the school and were asking the teacher, why you are late? Sometimes they were locking the main gate. They were asking, they were like the community, the parents, they were getting into the school. But that is now disappearing. Why it is disappearing? There is a political economy to it. The parents who are left to, the teachers, students who are left in the government school, their parents are illiterate parents. Their parents are marginalized sections of the society. I don't think they have a voice in the school.
Yes.
So they are not daring to get into a school and asking the teacher why you are late. And if you ask that question, I interviewed some of the parents who are sending their children to private schools. They said, we are not bothered for that because my child is getting into the private school by accessing private school.
Yes.
So I am not worried what is happening in the government school. Rather, who all are sending there, they should be worried. But actually, they don't have a voice to raise in the school what is happening. So in that way, there is a complete, like the process that is happening now, the pathway that we are adopting now is completely damaging the schooling system. And the difference between have and have not is increasing day by day. And that is going to be very dangerous. And in the role of education to minimize inequality is working otherwise. It is widening the inequality in the society. And these are some of the dangerous things that the society is going to face in next, let's say, already facing and going to face very seriously in the next couple of years. That I think is not discussed in the policy document. That's one important thing that needs to be discussed, and it's absent in the policy document.
Yeah.
Thank you.
True. In Indian context, when we are talking about government and private collaboration, we should rather ask Goddess Lakshmi and Goddess Saraswati for a collaboration to reduce the gaps and discard the hierarchy system, at least in our education system.
Yeah, that's true. But we know that mythology says they can't come together, but we should bring that.
But Indian philosophy is much guided by mythology, I suppose.
Yeah, you are right.
Yeah, and teachers should be meant for imparting quality education and should not be engaged in making a goody-goody picture for the government.
Yeah, you are right.
Yeah.
I'm completely agreeing with your point.
Yeah. Now, I would like to take a view of Dr. Biswal on this point.
Yeah, this discussion is going very interesting as Dr. Choudhury's data supported by other evidences about the school teacher, whether he is a contractor or a distributor. And I guess from my research also, I found similar kind of experiences in the tribal regions. Back in 2003, when the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan started, it is not now, it has started then. I had been to KBK district to evaluate the TLM and SIC grants then, and I found that many teachers are managing the resources and showcasing how they have spent as if they are doing some kind of calculation and teaching is their secondary or maybe a tertiary kind of thing. It's not very important in education. And so far as this private education system is concerned, private education system does not necessarily provide a quality education to me. I have visited many private education systems, school, college, universities, and have also worked in many such organizations. What I find is there is some kind of environment. They provide a kind of environment, but that environment is not conducive for education per se. That environment is created to impress others and to do some business out of that. It is not targeted to give quality education to the stakeholders. That is one point. Second, to the public and private education system, I would say that while in school we are not, the parents are not very interested to enroll their kids in the government schools or public schools. They enroll their school children in private schooling system. When it comes to higher education, be it engineering education, they prefer government education system than the private one. I
Even
do
in
not know
jobs
this.
also, even
Yeah,
in jobs.
this is the dichotomy in our country. Like they throughout their school, they have been into the private education system, and now when it comes to engineering education or medical education, they
And getting a job.
try to enter into the national competitive examinations to get a seat in AIMS or get a seat in IITs or NITs like that. That is strange to understand. And so far as this tuition, even students who are going to private schools, they are going to tuition. If you are providing quality education in private schools, then what is the need of tuitions? I have seen many students running from the early morning to school, and then after the school they go to the coaching centers. At 11 p.m. at night they were coming back from the coaching centers. Someday I had experience, a student is riding his bike very fast, and he could have met with an accident. uh, then I tried to stop him and asked, "What happened? Why are you so hurry?" Sir, you see, I am coming back from my coaching center and I'm still in my school uniform. I asked him where he is reading. So he took the name of a private school. Then how we say that the private schooling system is providing a quality education and government schools are not providing quality education? Probably what Dr. Choudhury has said, it is a systematic approach to stop all the public funded schools and to encourage the private medium schools for education, because there is some ulterior motive. That is why it is being promoted. And that is why we are not questioning the private partnership, but the intention must be clear. The intention should not be to earn money out of this, and which is very clear these days. If some child is getting admitted to a private school, the parents has to pay a heavy amount of money. And even currently in this corona pandemic, we have seen some schools have given contract to private coaching centers because schools are not running. So there are some online classes going on. Some schools have given it to private coaching centers, some sections of their students, and they pay the amount to the coaching center, and there is a nexus of the private schools and the coaching centers. This is what is happening. Whereas the government school system, where the teachers are qualified enough, they can do, but they are engaged in some other activities. Their training is not proper, their facilities is not given to them, and they are being questioned for everything which is not related to their studies and education but other things. How do they manage the school? How do they manage the attendance? How do they see whether it is happening or not? All these issues keep coming, and playing a very crucial role in deciding whether private education is good or public funded education is good. Apart from this, I am also not completely holding responsible government for these things, there are parents who are too much guided by the English medium education system in our country. I'm not sure whether those who are in the English medium education system, they are producing very good quality brains, though English is important for us. I know it is a global language and without English it is not possible. But can we ensure that having a very good English at a very early age would make somebody successful? I don't think so. Many of us are from vernacular medium and we are doing well. What is wrong in that? We have started our English, learning English at the age of 9 or 10 years. Have we not read English then? So there must be some kind of awareness which is lacking among the parents, and from government initiative, we have to match this. Government must ensure that quality education should happen, and other jobs, which is talking about midday meal and all other things, which is the job of a contractor or distributor or whoever he may be, can be appointed separately, not the teacher. Teacher's job is to educate, and teaching is not a profession like any other profession. A teacher is a teacher for 24/7. Teacher is not like just do some file work and over. Your job is over for the day. It is not a 9 to 5 job. Teacher is a thinker. Teacher engages in a creative activity throughout the day. So in order to have quality education, we must think about the teacher and the taught. Both are individuals. At that level, our effort should be the maximum.
Thank you, Dr. Biswal, for the insight. Nowadays, what we can see that education is becoming more an industry where profit making is the priority rather than welfare. So, how the private bodies could be philanthropic, just the time can answer it with the execution of NEP 2020.
Yes.
Moving over to our next issue, like very often in life, there comes a situation when we have to make a difficult choice between two things. At such tough calls, we set our priority and choose one. In a country like India, there are many children who are forced to make a choice between going to school and being educated on one side, and fighting with hunger and struggling to be alive on other. In this situation, what to choose and why? One in every 5 students is dropping out of school, which is the major concern of NEP 2020. And this may be some due to pull-out factors and some due to push-out factors. Does NEP 2020 have any scope to deal with child labor-induced school dropout or school dropout-induced child labor? Earn to leave, create dropout, or dropout creates child labor? Dr. Choudhury, how would you like to comment on this egg-chicken theory? And do NEP 2020 has a place for it? Dr.
Again, I thank Dr. Nayak for this getting this debate alive among us, because this is also a serious issue that we are facing today.
Yes.
Dropout and the out of school children are serious issues in our education system. To me, it's unthinkable. Even after 7 decades of independence, children are not attending school, which I find is a serious issue for the country. We know that who all are dropping out
and why.
Who all are not getting into school, and why. It's important to understand who all are dropping out of the school and why they are dropping out of school, as you said. So, what is happening actually, I want to beat a beat, then I will get into the issue. If you see the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan that started in 2001, then we've also midday meal has started, like providing meals in the school, has helped us to some extent to minimize the dropout, also to get some children, particularly the children from marginalized sections of society, into school. But what happens in the reality is, there are several children who come to school, but they don't attend the school, or they attend for a few months, and then they again drop out from the school. Even we declared RT, right to elementary education, as a fundamental right under Right to Education Act, but that is also not working well. Even after that, we are not seeing that children are in the school. Several of children, they are in the school who are supposed to be in the school. They are in the school, rather they are in the labor market, or as you say, they are working as child labor. So how this entire education system or the public discourse or the policy space is trying to understand this? How the society at large or government to some extent or public at large is looking at this issue. I want to give one example in this. The Right to Education Act declares 25% enrollment in EWS category in private schools. I think you must be aware about it. That 25% of the children in the total intake in the school will be from EWS, economically weaker sections of the society. That will give them a better quality education, and also it will minimize dropout. The aim was this, right, to provide quality education to the poor children. But what is happening in the ground reality? If you see, there are several studies, particularly sociological studies that have come out saying that how the children are treated differently in the school, particularly in private, let's say, particularly in the elite private school. The children who are getting into those from this category, they are being forced to sit in a separate classroom, not in the classroom that is for the children who are from rich families. So sometimes there are issues from the parents saying that we are paying a lot. Why my child will sit in the classroom with the others who are not being vaccinated properly? Why they will be taught with the children who cannot speak English properly? So these are some of the issues. And to find the solution, even private schools are running the classes in the evening time for these children separately. So the idea was not like the idea was to create an inclusive sphere or atmosphere in the school by which these poor children will learn in the school. So this is I am saying one example. There will be several other examples of this kind where we are trying to keep the poor children in school, but the system is failing. And I want to relate this with my earlier point where I said that the school education system is segregated. It is quite heterogeneous. And it's very difficult to expect that the children of marginalized section of the society who cannot pay the fee in private schools will get quality education. And these are some of the important reasons that children are not attending schools regularly. I want to give two important reasons for this. Why it is the children who are attending schools but not regularly. One important thing that I want to say is the children who are getting into the school, they are not learning well in the school. And the research says this is an important reason for dropping out. If a child is not learning properly in the classroom, let's say yesterday in the class the child could not get any idea from the teacher, then the child, I think a psychologist, I think Professor Biswal will tell better being a psychologist, that child will not be interested, will not be motivated to get into the classroom in the next day. So, and also in my study, I interviewed some of the parents who withdrawn their children from schools, particularly from government schools, and even they don't have capacity to send their children to private schools. They are saying, if my child is not learning in the government school, then why I should send my child to the school?
Very true.
So these are so this learning gap, or you say the learning gap by the child needs to be minimized. I also see the role of pedagogy in this, like how the teachers are handling this situation. There are macro issues. I may come into that little later, but I want to get into some micro issues. One I said about the learning gap, that is demotivating the child to get into the school. The second important issue about the teaching learning process in the classroom. The teaching learning process in the classroom needs to be understood very clearly. And the teachers who are there in the school, what kind of language they are using. I think Professor Biswal said about the tribal areas. See, he might have better ideas. He can reflect on this. That in tribal areas, language is a major issue. Once they are not getting into that the language that is being taught in the school, the curriculum that is being followed, the textbook that is being given to them for reading, they are demotivated and they are out of school. One example I want to give in this context, my teacher once shared with me in the classroom, I want to borrow this idea from him, that he told a mathematics teacher said to a child for subtraction. He said, just to a child that you subtract 82 minus 5, like subtract 5 from 82. So how is the subtraction goes? Usually in the classroom we say if you write 82, then 5 below, then 2 minus 5, we say 2 is bigger, 5, sorry, smaller, 5 is bigger. So we can't do that. So let us borrow. 1 from 8, so it will be 12, then it becomes 12 minus 5 is 7, then 7, 7. So it becomes 77. Then one child just stood up and said in the classroom, "Sir, I want to say something." Then the teacher said, "What are you trying to say? This is a simple subtraction." But the child said, "This is a simple subtraction, sir, but you are saying about borrowing something from the other, like borrowing 1 from 8. But just before this class, I had a social science class, and my social science teacher told borrowing is a bad habit." So you see how the pedagogy plays and how the student's mind plays in the classroom. And if we are not able to understand the student's mind in the classroom properly, being a teacher, that damages the child a lot in the education process, and they slowly getting into the trap of dropout. And that is a very complex issue that is being less discussed in the literature, to my knowledge. Rather, we say about the financial reasons, we say about the other socio-economic reasons, but pedagogical reasons are very hidden in most of the cases. I want to highlight that particular point in this important occasion of World Literacy Day. NEP has given emphasis on reducing dropout. That's clear in the document, particularly in 2 ways. One is improving the infrastructure. Second one is tracking the learning levels of children. These two are very important. I found it very interesting. I didn't find how they are going to do that. That is an important thing. Yes, that is an important thing that is not being said in the policy steps. So I find that there are some successful models in the school. Those need to be emphasized. One is establishing more, let's say, the kind of schools we see in tribal areas such as Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya scheme. That is working very effectively to minimize dropouts, particularly in the school level. So that has given an emphasis in the this policy document also by extending it to secondary level. So those kind of initiatives are must in this. The other important initiative I found where the policy document is silent is about providing financial incentive to the children to cover the opportunity cost. Particularly the children from marginalized sections of society, they fear to get into the classroom because they are earning outside, being the child labor. But that needs to be understood very clearly.
Sure.
So my last point in this is a very complex issue. Dropout and out of school children are very complex issues. And that needs to be addressed with the help of multiple stakeholders. Government, as Professor Biswal told in his remarks also, that government may not do much. We need to involve community in this, which is lacking.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Dr. Biswal, we would like to take your view on this.
Yeah, we are talking about food for stomach versus food for brain.
Yeah.
Well, midday meal is a great initiative for children to come to school. However, we don't have any such motivation to learn. So there is a saying, if I can't learn the way you teach me the way I can learn. So the entire emphasis is given at an early age to the teacher. It is teacher's responsibility to innovate ways how to engage the child, how to create interest in the child. At the same time, the parents at home, those who are at least the literate parents or educated parents, they can also create that kind of atmosphere, and there are ways. Further, no particular way is generalizable. So generalizing one instance to other instance is not good. We need to understand the specific situational problems or maybe situational issues before we take up some problem to handle. This is one aspect. Making learning fun and child-centric would definitely increase the compliance to visit school. Now children are coming for midday meal, those who are from the rural areas or from a poor socioeconomic background. But this cannot go on because we are conditioning those children for midday meal only, but not for education. And teachers are also coming to manage the midday meal, not for education. So the entire purpose of giving education is lost. And we need to see whether there is a psychological hunger to learn and how it can be created. And this is a challenge for all of us. And we need to invest in understanding this issue. Training teachers and employing teachers who really want to contribute in children's education would help. What happens, many of the teachers who come to the teaching profession nowadays or maybe earlier, those who couldn't find a better job in other sectors, they come to teaching. Whereas it should be the other way around. The good students who were good students in their career, they should come to teaching, because teaching creates any other profession. But sadly, we have many instances of having teachers who are actually not interested to teach, but somehow they couldn't get any kind of other job, so that's why they are in teaching. So there are many teachers who are really interested and who really invest in children and contribute well. But teaching should not be treated like any other profession, as I have mentioned. It is a passion, it is a dedication, it is a mission. The respect for our teaching community who builds a nation is hardly seen these days. Further, in order to teach well, one must get ample opportunity to think and express freely and critically. Creativity is the greatest asset of a teacher. If their role is limited to just follow some orders, then we are pushing the entire nation to darkness sooner than later. So in this context, we should not minimize the role of a teacher to some kind of a manager. We must invest in the individual. The more you invest in the teachers, the more quality we'll get, and we can create the real hunger in people to learn, because it can also be created. Some kind of incentives can be created. It is not like because learning happening in a bookish manner. So in order to take something from the environment, the teacher has to come to the class prepared in an innovative way. We have so many movies, we have seen so many Hindi movies that have been created, how they try to attract the students, because each child is unique. That uniqueness we are not addressing in our education. We try to push the group from one class to the other class. So such kind of practices is not helping us in a long term.
Okay. Providing a quality education to girls is the best way to increase the education levels for these socio-economically disadvantaged groups, not just in the present but also in the future generation. This is what NEP 2020 emphasizes. Back in the year 2015, with a view to empower women through education and to address the issues of declining child sex ratio, Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, that is Save and Educate the Girl Child, was launched. Despite several central and state initiatives to enhance girl-child education, we can still find the traces of early marriages among girls, teenage motherhood, gender discrimination in school enrollment and continuing studies, physical and mental harassments, and many such related exploitations. So, what is the difference between Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao movement in 2015 and the moves taken in NEP 2020 now to empower girls through education? Shall we consider it as the same wild and new bottle? Our listeners, especially our women listeners, would definitely like to find their place and scope in NEP 2020. Dr. Choudhury, how would you like to address this issue? Can you please tell our listeners briefly so that they could be benefited?
So this is again an interesting issue, and you being the women, and you have raised this issue very interesting. You raised this interesting issue, we should debate on it.
Yes.
Let me start with a positive note. Women are progressing in the society, and we should celebrate this.
Yes.
That several women are now in the education sector. They are leading the society. We have got even women presidents. There are several vice chancellors who are leading the universities or other higher education institutions in the country. There are so many examples of this kind, and we must celebrate. The country must celebrate.
Yeah.
Having said this, if you see the literature on women education and development, initially we talked about education and development. Let us focus a bit on women education and development in particular.
Mm-hmm.
pathways through which education is linked with women development is being understood very clearly in the current context, both in international as well as in the Indian context. But what I found is there is still a scope to realize it better. Literature, the literature that have come out on women education and development have emphasized the externalities that education gives to women. Let me underline this underline this point, that the externalities that education gives, particularly to the women community. For example, an educated mother invests more on her child's education than a male educated male.
True.
Women education helps in reducing infant mortality. Women education helps in providing better health to the child. Women education helps in managing the household better. There are several such examples. So what I am trying to emphasize in this case is the role of women in the society, and educating them is being one of the important issue that needs to be understood carefully in Indian context. But what NEP, I want to brief a bit in this because time also going on. What NEP 2020 has not specifically, the women 2020, this NEP 2020 has not said very specifically on this issue. That is my apprehension on this issue.
Yeah.
What it has done, it has clubbed in gender and several other socio-economic issues, which are clubbing them into socio-economically disadvantaged groups, or we call them SEDG. Or it is also said under the advantage, something of that kind, underdeveloped groups or something of that kind. Disadvantaged groups. So what it is trying to say, I am not exactly remembering the terminology, but this is of this kind, SEDG and all. What I am trying to say, there is a need to highlight the women issue specifically. We need to understand who are the women who are not getting education, who are the women or females who are being dropping out from the system. So in this context, I want to highlight the intersectionality of the society. Like I would say, if I say that let us look at a girl from Muslim community living in a rural area and belong to a poor family. So I am not looking at a girl as girl. I am looking at a girl who belongs to Muslim community, living in rural areas, and also belong to poor family. So what is the probability or what is the chance of that girl being in the classroom? That is my question at this moment. So what I am trying to say, looking at only women as specific, or without unfolding the women itself, without unfolding the issue of women education itself by looking at different levels, will mislead us. And that's what is happening in the ground. We are saying that there is an increase in the women enrollment. We are celebrating that. But there are several women from marginalized section of the society not getting into the school. Let's the women from first generation learners whose parents are illiterate, then is to be there in the school, then is to come into the mainstream. Those are actually lacking. What I find, the NEP has not said anything specific to this issue. What I want to emphasize in this case is there is a need on deeper understanding of this issue. The women education also, again another important point I want to say, the women education is also linked with several other socio-cultural issues in Indian context. It's not about the problem with women and not getting into the education. There are several other problems in the periphery or somewhere in the center that are hindering the women to get into the schools or get into the colleges. Those are not being looked at as a package. That needs to be looked at as a package. Particularly in Indian society where patriarchy plays an important role and also shapes this kind of thinking that is there in the society. You said about early marriage. There are several other important problems that women face, even in domestic violence and several other things. Those need to be looked at in a what we call very, I will say integrated manner. Not in a piecemeal manner looking, okay, women is not getting into education. There are several problems behind or several issues to understand that issue. There are several other issues to understand that particular issue. But we are not getting into that debate. We are looking at in a very narrow sense the issue. That is an important flaw in our policy space that needs to be corrected. And I think NEP should look at this issue very carefully, not by saying that they are under SEDs or underdeveloped groups and they can be improved over the years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Women should be given importance for the nation building.
Yes,
Dr.
that
Biswal,
must.
Dr. Biswal, how would you like to say about the empowering women through education?
Well, this is an important issue, can never be ignored. And we all know when a girl is educated, an entire family becomes educated. Ensuring girls' education is a joint responsibility of parents, teachers, educational institutions, and above all, the government. But what I find, there seems to be a severe lack of coordination among these agencies and stakeholders for a number of reasons. The primary reason that I find is an attitudinal barrier, where the girl is often looked down upon compared to a boy in a family. So it begins with the family. So it must start from the parents first. Then other agencies would change their attitude. And we are not emphasizing enough on the upbringing of the girl child at home. We are just talking about what is happening in the society, but we are not talking about the family. Family plays a very vital role in the process of educating a girl child. Just chanting sugar-coated words in praise of girls and their achievements is not enough. Our mindsets need to change. To be very brief, I want to say this much.
Okay, we should begin charity from our home itself, rather than using high-sounding slogans like "Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao," "Betiyan to hai lamha khushi ka," and etc. etc. We should rather work how to enhance the quality of our women through skill or education for a better nation building.
Yes,
Then moving to the next issue, after a long span of time, there is a holistic formulation of national education policy that we all know. In fact, National Education Policy 2020 is the first education policy of the 21st century and aims to address the many growing developmental imperatives of the country with lucrative ideas and objectives. So in this context, there are many things that is to be done, but how to do this is rather missing in NEP, what I think. And so discussing on this issue, my question is to both Dr. Biswal and Dr. Choudhury. We generally find a gap between formulation and execution of policies in India. So what would you like, or how would you suggest making a quality bridge between this well-formulated national education policy and its effective execution? Dr. Biswal would please like to highlight on this.
Yeah, this is one of the important issues. We bring so many policies to for the country with a purpose to develop, but many a times our policies are lacking the required amount of research, which can be backed up by research, and the output based on evidence-based research is very minimal, or maybe it is not there. Formulating policies in AC rooms and copy pasting from other available documents would not be successful when it comes to implementation. There is a saying in Odia, Badi Baigano, Bonamo Pothi Baigano, where there is a contrast. It says that there is a theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. And if we do not know what is happening in the field, then it is not possible to just formulate the policies by looking at different documents. A researcher goes to the field, brings in the required information and knowledge and feeds into his research or her research and tries to convince the audience that this is what is happening, but hardly those research items or research articles are being referred while preparing a policy, because it is not easy to prepare a policy, but we are so fast in developing a policy document and implement also. A well-designed study or research where policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders can participate, and further they can also give their inputs, that would work well on the ground. But it is not the scenario. And looking at the diversities of such a big country like ours, our plan must follow a thorough approach rather than an impulsive one to gain something immediately. This is what we find in many of the policy documents that we are getting so quickly, so early in these recent days, that one policy is coming. I'll talk about some other policies on disability, mental health, and so many other issues. We were quick in doing these policies, but when we see the ground realities are completely opposite to the policy documents. And probably it is the lack of proper research and development and the involvement of academicians in the policy research, where the policies can be well documented based on the evidences available in our own country, not copy pasting from other documents. So that's what I would like to highlight.
Dr. Choudhury, how would you like to address this issue?
Yeah, thank you. I would say after a long waiting, Indian citizens have got the taste of a new education policy, 2020. So given the changes that society is going through in the 21st century, it is important to have a new education policy for the country, and we should celebrate this. There is no doubt on it. That said, education policy is very, a central public policy in today's knowledge economy and welfare state. This I find this should be the most important public policy in the country. It has been and continues to be the case that discourse on educational issues in the Indian policy spectrum is in the periphery. Let me clarify this point. It has been and continues to be, still it is continuing, that the issues on education in the policy sphere or in the policy spectrum is in the periphery. It's never been till that. It's never been the central state. Once I read a write-up of Professor Kumar, educationist, great educationist. Education is an uninteresting stuff for political parties. It doesn't figure a serious election issue. Even it is said that it doesn't compete with other issues like water, electricity, making roads, and therefore it doesn't bring attention of our political parties. It's quite true. When I read this, I found that this is the case. Because once you are getting into the voter, you are trying to say how many households you have provided electricity, whether you have given water to them, whether you have given housing facilities to them, whether you have built roads for them, and so on and so forth. But we hardly, in the election issue, we say that how many people you are educated for the last 5 years or so. So this is a peculiar thing that we get in the Indian society. And the policy documents should be understood in this broader context. If the political parties are not interested much in showing the findings or showing the initiatives they have taken in the education sector, so there will be less political commitment to that. And that's what actually happening in Indian case. Let me clarify. Also, there is a common perception that even if we get a policy in the education sector, it is first as a good academic document. Because we find that implementation of the recommendations that are there in the policy document is a serious issue that we are not experiencing now. We are experiencing starting from the first policy document. Even 66, even Ramakrishna committee report, even 86 policy, and so on and so forth. What actually happening? There is a clear gap, and this education policy, the gap is very high in the case of education, where policy and implementation is not actually happening side by side. But being a young academician of the country, I found the youth of the country should alter this trend, and I hope in the changing discourse on education, because there you will see that is a changing discourse on education, even among the parents. They are becoming a little careful about the education of their children. If you see the last years, this was not the case. Even more girl children are getting into the school. Inequality is now not very much widening among boys and girls to the extent that was there, let's say 20 years back. Given the positive changes that are there in the society, what I find or I expect that the changing discourse that is happening on education in the society will definitely bring a change in the implementation as well.
Okay.
That's my point. Several issues. What I want to emphasize here that there are several issues. Those are problems in the education sector are clear to us. It's not like they are not clear. They are clear to us. We need action on that. Let's say we know that people in or children in the tribal areas are not getting into the school. Let us intervene in that. We know that girls are not coming to the school. There are several girls who are out of school. Let us intervene in that. So there are several. We know that quality of higher education is not up to the mark. Let us intervene in that. Discourse or the issues have come out. Even national education policy, even before this policy also issues were there. But what is happening is our political commitment, let me say, bring this point very clearly. Our political commitment to improve the education system of the country is not in place. I am not saying this government, that government. I am saying across the government. I am saying over the years since independence. This is the case. We are not committing so much to the education sector. And that's what is being reflected the way now the education sector is heading in the country. If we will be a political commitment from the political commitment to the education sector, then definitely it will bring huge public investment, stop regulatory mechanism, curbing of commercialization, improving the quality of education, both school and higher levels, and that will give a better education system for the country. Until and unless there is a clear political commitment and also the support from public, let's say parents and community, we are not going to achieve the target even if we will have several policy documents like in NEP 2020. It's a pleasure to really reflect my points on this.
We are very much thankful also. On this point, actually, I also want to express my view that moreover in our country, there is always a lack of documentation, what we have often seen, being the researcher, getting data and all these things. And there is very possibilities of rather manipulation of data. Correct ground level data with all level of accuracy starting from collection, entry, interpretation, analysis, formulation and execution can certainly bring a success. This is particularly what I have seen during my course of research. And
I want to yes, no, you are right. We are very weak in having education data as such. The weakest one, I would say, among several developing countries. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So now I hope this discussion would help our policymakers, practitioners, educators and other stakeholders to gain some insights and implement them to overcome the literacy challenges in India. At this note, I thank Dr. Choudhury and Dr. Biswal for their valuable time and insight. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I sincerely thank Dr. Nayak and your foundation to bring this timely issue to the public domain. And I hope we will talk more on these issues in some other forum. I wish all the best to you and your foundation.
Thank you.
And that is working in the ground level. Yeah, that is working in the ground level.
Yes.
That too issues on education and several other social issues.
Thank you
which
so
are
much.
important for the society.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nayak, for this wonderful and interesting discussion and inviting us to this forum. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.